We have some very special guests watching on the YouTube channel tonight from the cast of Murphy's Inc. Murphy's Inc., you ask, is what? An audio adventure podcast and terrestrial radio show following the adventures of a for-profit time team traveling through time to steal precious artifacts. Along the way, meeting famous historical figures, getting in trouble and danger, and experiencing historical events shown only in dusty, faded textbooks. Your storyteller tonight, that's me, is privileged to play one of the characters on the show. Season 1 is available now to listen to, and Season 2 is hot in production, and we'll be offering a listening party here soon in Second Life and in Kitely. On with the show, which is tonight, Swashbuckling Adventures Meet the Mythos, High Seas Cthulhu. A time when tall ships roamed the oceans and creatures lurked in the dark depths. All hands on deck, ready to cannon, and prepare to engage in terrors unknown. Okay, our first story is called Dark Blue by Alan Dean Foster. Yeah, that Alan Dean Foster. The sea below the keel of the ocean-going ketch Repara was the bluest blue Chase Rotgarn had ever seen. In fact, it was bluer than blue. Bluer than the clearest sky. Bluer than all the lapis lazuli in Afghanistan. Bluer than sapphire, azurite, or a studio track by Coltrane. Rotgarn had spent considerable time on a number of boats on 2 oceans, but he had never seen blue like this. He asked Captain Santos about it. Aye, there are no fish here in this deep, deep water. No fish because there's no zooplankton, you see. No zooplankton because there's no phytoplankton. Standing on the flying bridge with his long hair tucked under his cap and dark wraparound shades shielding his eyes from the sun and wind, Santos nodded to port. With no microscopic life in the waters, no life of any kind, there's nothing to scatter the sunshine. Everything gets absorbed except the blue, you see. The sun pours down unobstructed and just keeps going and going until it fades away into the indigo black. Now Rutger nodded his understanding as he raised the expensive binoculars that were hanging from the padded strap around his neck. They hadn't seen a thing since leaving Pitcairn Island. Only a few patrolling seabirds searching diligently for the fish Santos insisted were not there. They had tried, but had been unable to land at Pitcairn. The island's famous swells were too high for their single rigid inflatable to chance a dash for the concrete and rock breakwater that protected the tiny artificial harbor at Bounty Bay. And given the rough conditions, the islanders were not inclined to risk one of their vital moss aluminum boats just to venture out to say hello to those on board a tramp ketch like the Repara. As it sailed on eastward out of sight, Pitcairn's towering gleam-clad peaks, Rotgarn had reflected in passing that the original Bounty mutineers, yes, that's HMS Bounty, Mutiny on the Bounty, you know that one. The mutineers had indeed succeeded in isolating themselves on one of the least accessible islands in the entire South Pacific. And now the Repara was headed for a speck of land that was even more inaccessible than Pitcairn, and devoid even of the resilient descendants of rowdy mutineers and the dedicated Vahinis. A more or less oval chunk of solid coral limestone rising straight up out of the ocean from a depth of 3.5 kilometers. Henderson Island lay another 200 kilometers northeast of Pitcairn, which in turn was more than twice that distance from where he had met up with the Repara in the Gambier Islands of southern French Polynesia. The nearest airstrip to Henderson was on Mangariva, more than 600 kilometers away in the Gambiers. No aircraft could land on Pitcairn. It was far too far to reach by chopper. The closest outpost of civilization to Henderson in the other direction was Easter Island, which lay so far over the dead, flat horizon that the inhabitants of Mangariva were next-door neighbors by comparison. Why on earth would you want to go to such a god-forsaken place like this Henderson? His wealthy friends had asked him once he'd explained what and where it was. And why not go to Maui or the Bahamas? You say there's nothing on Henderson but birds. And you're not a birder, are you? Well, that much was true. Chase Rotgarn did not collect bird sightings, nor was he an especially avid scuba diver. What he did collect was money. And at that, he was very, very good. For more than 2 years, he had been researching the history of the ships that had gone missing in the Henderson vicinity. Ships that had been blown off course or had become lost due to navigational error or had simply foundered in the storms. Vessels that disappeared in this part of the Pacific, well, they well and truly vanished. No ship that encountered trouble in the Azure wasteland could expect help. And since leaving Mangariva, they had seen exactly one other vessel, a big container ship heading for Cape Horn. Most commercial traffic bound from the South Pacific for the Atlantic took the easier, much faster route north of the Panama Canal. As for fishing boats, there were no long liners here, no purse seiners, because as Captain Santos had pointed out, there were no fish. There were no fish because there was nothing for them to eat. Concerning bottom trawlers, the bottom was 3 or 4 kilometers down and unknown, too deep to trawl safely for too little potential reward for a big dragliner to take the risk. When Henderson Island itself finally hove into view, days later, and its appearance was something of an anticlimax, Röntgen was not disillusioned. The reality matched the few pictures he had been able to find of the place. Unlike Bora Bora or Rarotonga, Pacific Islands had boasted dramatic central peaks and gleaming turquoise lagoons, as Henderson was a Makatea island. Several others were scattered around the Pacific. There were huge blocks of limestone and coral that had been uplifted and exposed to the air when the sea levels had fallen during the last ice age. Not only were they usually devoid of beaches, a visitor could not even walk very easily on the Makatea. Rain eroded the limestone and razor-sharp boot-slicing, flesh-shearing blades and pinnacles of solid rock. As opposed to terrestrial animals and humans, certain well-adapted birds and vegetation thrived in the otherwise hostile Makatea environment. Shearwaters and noddies, petrels, and 4 species of endemics made their home on Henderson. Its only regular human visitors were pitcairners, who came once or twice a year to collect the valuable hardwood like miro for the carvings that constitute a substantial part of their income. Other than that, Henderson Island had been left to the birds, the crabs, a few lizards, and the ubiquitous Polynesian rat, except for one rumored spring visible only on the single narrow beach at low tide. There was not even any fresh water to be had. Not a good place, Rodgren reflected, on which to be marooned. Of course, these days, Henderson is joined by 34 million tons of discarded plastic, but that's a different story. At any rate, Rodgren was not interested in spending time on Henderson, however wildly attractive the place might be to the rare visiting scientist. No. It was a photograph that had finally brought Rodgren to this, one of the most isolated tropical islands on Earth. It was the same photograph that had led him to the charter of the Repair and its somewhat taciturn but efficient crew. His cultivated friends in New York had been right about one thing. No one, anywhere, much wanted to go to Henderson. It had taken him months, a lot of searching on the net and an extensive exchange of querulous emails before he found a captain with a ship willing to travel so far from the bounds of civilization, to waters where no help could be expected in the event of trouble. No passing ship could be hailed for assistance, and there was nothing to see and no one to visit. Happily, in the course of their exchange of emails, Salvatore Santos had not pressed his prospective employer for a trip rationale. All that had been necessary was to agree on a price. Henderson slid past astern now, its dark white 30-meter-high cliffs gleaming like chalk in the sun, its population of seabirds forming a flat, hazy gray cloud above the trees as they cherished the one bit of dry land for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The island was still in view astern when Rodgren checked his GPS one more time, turned to the captain, and declared with confidence, "This is the place." Looking up from the wheel and his bridge instruments, the unshaven Portuguese Tahitian squinted at his employer. "Yeah?" He waved his sun-cured hand at the surrounding sea, which obligingly had subsided almost to a flat calm. "You want to turn up anchor? Here. Right here." Rodgren smirked. He knew something the captain did not know. If his 2 years of painstaking research was right, he knew something nobody else knew. Well, with the possible exception of the bored astronaut on board the space shuttle who had taken the photograph that the energetic Rodgren had scanned in more detail than anyone at NOAA or NASA. "Check your depth finder, Captain." Santos had not bothered to look at that particular readout since leaving Pitcairn. The ocean out here was benthonic, and even this close to Henderson had dropped off sharply into the abyss. Under the circumstances, the captain showed remarkable aplomb as he checked the relevant monitor and reported, "What do you know? There's an uneven but largely flat surface 30 meters directly below us. I'm assuming it's a seamount. It's very small and at a depth that renders it harmless to passing ships, of which there are not any around here anyway. Not surprising it's absent from the charts. Well, it's not really all that small, is it? Having looked forward for so long to springing this knowledge on someone else, Rodgren found that he was enjoying himself immensely. And it's not just a seamount. Santos eyed him uncertainly. Out of the corner of an eye, Rodgren could see several members of the half-dozen-strong crew watching the two men from the deck. The captain finally smiled. Yes, I understand now. You are a crazy man. I knew that when you hired me in my boat to bring you all this way, but that didn't bother me, yeah. A man can be as crazy as he like, yeah, so long as his money is sane. Kneeling, Rodgren opened the small, watertight pelican case that occupied a compartment on the bridge near his feet. It contained none of the expensive camera gear it was designed to coddle and protect. Instead, it was full of envelopes, flash drives, and a laptop computer. Selecting and unsealing one of the envelopes, he removed several glossy 8x10 prints with pictures and arrows and a paragraph in the back of each one, and handed the top one to Santos. Have a look at this. The captain examined the photo with fresh interest. Henderson. Take it from space, yeah? View slightly from the south, even with the clouds, you can't mistake the shape of Henderson Island. Very good. Rodgren handed him the next picture. Studying it, Santos frowned. Henderson again. Much closer view. He tapped the picture with a forefinger. Here, the water is so clear you can see a suggestion of the seamount we're over right now, can't you? Rodgren repressed a knowing smirk as he passed over the third and last picture. That last one was a blow-up, multiple magnification. This one is much better, with the resolution and computer radar enhanced and corrected for depth, shadow, atmospheric distortion, and other scaring factors. I needn't go into detail. Captain Santos studied the picture, looked at it for a long time, and then he handed it back to its owner. They still think it's nothing but a seamount. Captain, seamounts have broken crowns, or they're conical in shape or capped with solidified lava, or they sport a sunken lagoon. He gestured with the photo. This one is as flat on top as a Los Angeles parking lot, except for those bumps with very distinctive shapes. The corner of the captain's mouth twitched slightly upward. Or you think this is a parking lot? Rodgren had to laugh. I'm not crazy, Salvatore. Despite what you might think, those bumps are ships that have gone down here, at least 4, maybe as many as 10, maybe more than that. Once we get down there, 2 of the 4 are definitely pre-19th century. You know what that means? Maybe treasure galleons that were sailing back to Spain from the Philippines, trying to sneak around the Horn instead of sailing to Peru or Panama along routes that were haunted by English privateers like Drake. And before they could reach the Horn, they got lost, or they slammed into Henderson's rocks. Most went down out in the depths. Yeah, but a few. Again, he tapped the photo. A few fetched up right here, at a depth reachable with nothing more elaborate than conventional sport diving equipment. He stared as hard as he slipped the picture back in the envelope. Put down the anchor, Captain. Santos hesitated a moment, then shrugged. It's your money, Monken. You may be right. There may be a ship or 2 down there, but I don't think there's any treasure. And even if there is, anything we might find belongs to the British government, eh? Henderson is part of the Pitcairn British Overseas Territory, eh? Well, that's absolutely correct, Captain. With slow deliberation, Rodgren returned the envelope to the watertight case. And you can see for yourself how well this part of the territory is policed, yeah? Should we find anything, we'll declare it immediately when we return to Mangariva, I'm sure you'll be the first to go out of your way to inform the British consul in Papeete about any discoveries we may make, won't you, Captain? The captain pursed his lips. To Rodgren, they almost seemed to be moving slowly in and out, in concert with the captain's thoughts. Finally, Santos smiled a broad, wide smile. Rodgren nodded curtly. He had gambled on just such a reaction as soon as he had met Santos, but he knew it was not much of a gamble. We understand each other, I think, Captain. Oh, yes, perfectly, Mr. Rodgren. I will tell Bartholomew to start readying the scuba gear. The water was not just clear. In the absence of microscopic pelagic life and located thousands of kilometers from the nearest source of pollutants, it was virtually transparent. As soon as he hit the water and started down, Rotgren felt as if he were diving in air. The only sound following his entry was the regularity of his respiration and the sporadic mutter of bubbles from the regulator. Oh, wait, that was my Darth Vader voice. Sorry. As for the questions that had brought him to this isolated corner of the planet, they were answered as soon as he entered the water. Just by looking down and without the aid of any special equipment, he could see the outlines of sunken ships resting atop the seabound 30 meters below. Not only could he see the ships, the water was so clear he could identify each vessel's type, condition, approximate age, and a host of other informative factors. Twisting as he slowly descended fins first, he located Captain Santos and gave him the thumbs up sign. His hair drifting lazily behind him like black seaweed, the captain nodded and responded in kind. Inclining his head and body downward, an excited Rotgren accelerated his descent. Inner exploration of the various shipwrecks and the actual search for treasure and other valuables would take place on future dives with additional equipment. A 30-meter descent would require a proper surface interval before the next dive. No matter. Now that his research had been confirmed, he found that he was not impatient. After all, it was not as if they were likely to be interrupted by other divers in the course of their salvage work during the next couple of weeks. They would remove the most valuable items first, hide them in the repair's ballast lockers and elsewhere on the ketch, and then load the prizes at night onto the private plane he would charter at Mangariva, and then return here for more. He was not worried about parceling out shares. There should be sufficient booty for all, and he would see to it that enough went to the crew of the ketch, so any notion of, say, tossing him overboard and keeping it all for themselves did not have any reason to get a grip on their thoughts. Besides, he knew more about this place than did any of them. He might know more than they could see. Unless they were utterly stupid, they would want to keep him alive in order to make use of that knowledge. He was elated to see that there were not 2 but 3 galleons, and one ship that, despite its state of advanced decrepitude, looked decidedly Chinese. A load of Ming porcelain. Now that would be a treasure indeed. As for the other more recent shipwrecks, they could hold all manner of lucrative cargo, but it was the prospect of finding older vessels that had drawn him here, and it was those antique craft that had understandably now captured the greater part of his interest. One galleon in particular seemed to be much better shaped than the others. Unfortunately, it teetered on the steep-sided edge of the seamount. Even at this depth, there was the danger that a particularly strong storm surge might send it toppling over into the unreachable depths. He reassured himself that since it had laid thus for hundreds of years, he was probably worrying unnecessarily. Signaling to Santos and to the other diver who was accompanying them, he finned off in the direction of the precariously balanced vessel. It would be all right, he saw as he soon began to circle. Its position was more stable than he had first surmised. Though lying at a sharp angle on its port side, the keel was jammed firmly against a long, narrow ridge of rock that protruded from the top of the seamount. Swooping parallel to the bottom, he swam from the bow toward the stern. Off to his right, the ocean dropped away to a cold, dark depths unknown. Strange rock formation, he decided. It almost looked as if it could have been carved there. It was impossible, of course, to be carved. Not likely. It was simply a natural limestone, a lava ridge that had eroded away to form an unusually straight bulwark atop the rest of the underlying rock. He remained convinced of that until he reached the stern of the galleon. Hovering there, he was able to read the name below the great cabin, Santa Isabella de Castillo. Santa Isabella de Castillo. Researching that name once he was back on dry land would likely tell him the ship's history and the cargo that she had been carrying on her last ill-fated voyage. Something else at the stern caught his eye. More rock mounted up to form a V-shaped fissure. The stern of the galleon had been wedged directly into this little crevice. How could that have happened, he wondered. It seemed too perfect, too unnaturally precise, a fit to be a consequence of the unruly action of the wind and wave and current. Still, it was not an impossible coincidence. Storm-driven subsurface currents could certainly have slammed the ship hard into such a pocket of waiting rock. It was then he saw the second galleon, and soon afterward the first steamship, jammed stern first into exactly identical crevices, that his thoughts began to wander to places that had nothing to do with treasure salvage, archaeology, or the conventional history of South Pacific exploration at all. Spinning around in the water, he saw that Santos had come up very close behind him. Gesturing at the third wedged ship, Röntgen formed a V shape with his hands, gestured at the vessel, and pushed his chin toward the V. Captain Santos nodded to show that he immediately grasped what the other man was striving to convey. By way of further response, he gestured downward over the side of the seamount and indicated that Röntgen should follow. Thoughts churning, the bemused entrepreneur started to comply, but then a check of his air supply dissuaded him. They'd been exploring at depth for a substantial period now. He had just enough air left in his tank to manage a slow, safe, proper ascent, coupled with a conservative safety stop at 5 meters. Hovering over the side of the seamount, however, Santos kept gesturing for Röntgen to follow him downward. Röntgen shook his head. No doubt a better, more experienced diver than the Manhattan-bound entrepreneur, the captain would naturally have used less air when more remaining, as with a deckhand who accompanied them. A cautious Röntgen saw that the other man was excited. Reluctantly, he kicked away from the stern of the sunken steamship and followed the Portuguese to the edge, wondering what was so important the captain felt the need to emphasize it so close to the end of the first of what would be many, many dives. Instead of pausing to wait for him, captain and crew promptly lowered their heads and started to swim straight down. Röntgen immediately held back. What was wrong with them? Were they suffering from a combination of exhilaration and nitrogen narcosis? Had they lost their bearings, control of their senses? He hovered in open water at the edge of the seamount as the two divers continued their rapid and inexplicable descent. If they went much deeper, they'd find themselves in real danger no matter how much air they had left. And that was when Röntgen saw that something was coming up, out of the abyss. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. It was no stretch of the imagination to vision something like that occurring at this depth, even in absolutely clear water. Weaving and working its way downward, unobstructed sunlight wove lazily intertwining patterns into the open water column. As Röntgen stared, wide-eyed, some of the patterns began to darken. Each rising shape slowly became something solid. Each was individually as big as the sunken steamship, and independent of the light that illuminated them, they writhed and twisted and coiled expectantly in the transparent, pellucid water. Splotches and dark green streaks grew visibly on the sides. A tentacle. Expelling bubbles in violent explosive stream, Röntgen started kicking for the surface. Santos and his companion were forgotten. If luck held, their presence might be enough to divert the ascending monster away from Röntgen. Archaeoteuthis, he thought wildly as he swam for the surface. Giant squid, or perhaps the fabled colossal squid, slithered up from the Atlantic to graze on passing whales. Röntgen kicked as he had never kicked in his life. He had no choice but to pause at 5 meters and decompress. If he did not outgas the nitrogen bubbles that accumulated in his bloodstream, the bends would kill him as surely and as painfully as any sea monster could. He forced himself not to look down, not to seek for what even now might be reaching up for him. If it came for him, better that his last conscious view was not one of hooked, flesh-ripping suckers and sharp slicing beak. Taken by the kraken, he thought wildly, what an end for a wily double dealer from New York. He did, however, have to periodically check his dive computer. 3 minutes left on his safety stop, then 2. Was it possible for a man to sweat underwater? He fought back the urge to cut short the decompress time and shoot for the surface early. Only seconds left to go now. He did not so much pop out of the water as breach. Flailing and kicking, he made it to the side of the ketch in minutes. Hands were waiting to take his weighted buoyancy compensator and tank and haul him out after them. Gasping for air, he collapsed on the warm, worn teak deck. Then it occurred to him, what if the monster came up after the boat itself? Though he had not seen its body, judging from the length of those monstrous tentacles alone, it was more than big enough to drag the ketch down to its doom, like some lost, forlorn ship in an ancient Spanish woodcut. Rushing to the side, he peered hesitantly over the gunwale, just in time to see the emerging water right where he had come up. The captain and his deckhand. Of the monster, there was no sign. He was there when the crew helped Santos onto the deck. Sucking in fresh, uncompressed air, the captain looked perfectly unfazed. A bewildered Röntgen found himself wondering if they really had encountered anything more substantial down there other than a trick of light and water. Did you see it? Did either of you see it? Of course we saw it. With the help of a crewman, Santos started to peel himself out of his wetsuit. What do you think I was pointing out to you, man? So perfunctory was his response that Röntgen found himself momentarily at a loss for words. You mean You saw that monster and you deliberately swam toward it? And you beckoned for me to join you? Santos was stepping out of his suit now and left standing in his Speedos. When a crew member offered him a towel, the captain waved it off. The sun would dry him. Aye. Beautiful, wasn't he? Beautiful. Huh. A stunned Ronkan could only gape. I don't know. I didn't see more than just arms, and I didn't hang around long enough to... He paused in mid-sentence, his brow creased. What do you mean, he? The great old one. He who waits dreaming, only when rarely disturbed does he rise, and dead usually for a few precious moments. The captain's eyes glittered. You should have followed her. You would have seen privy to her sight accorded to so very few. I have to thank you, Mr. Ronke. It is expensive to bring my people here to pay homage. We would have come another time anyway, but you have paid for that and more. For that, I thank you. Visit? Your people? What the hell are you blithering on about? Oh, we come here sometimes, Santos told him, to pray. Others have come before us and others will come after us. He gestured over the side. They are down there, believers and unbelievers together. Sacrifices to him who is the lord of the sunken city. No one else comes here. Few ships pass over this part of the Southern Ocean. There is no oil, there is no tuna. He is safe here. Yes, he's safe there in his house, dreaming the dead, until the time comes when he shall rise again. The captain ceased the drivel. But though no more words emerged from his mouth, his lips continued to move in and out, in and out, in and out, as I had on one or two previous occasions. The curious habit reminded a suddenly startled Ronken of a breathing fish. He started to back away. But there was nowhere to back to. There, on the deck of the sun-struck ketch in the middle of the great empty Southern Ocean. If you were coming here anyway, then why did you want to risk bringing me along? I'm not part of your stupid cult, whatever it is. Not that I care. I'm only interested in the ships that are down there and their contents. You can worship your big squid god or whatever it is all you want. I'll even contribute an appropriate offering if that'll make you feel better about working on this site. A furthering offer is... No, your part is not necessary, Santos burbled softly. That is for his disciples to provide. At a later, a more appropriate time. Yes, but we are glad you are here with us nonetheless. The rest of the crew was closing in now. Ronken saw, so quietly that he hadn't noticed, like a shoal of sharks. Their lips began to pulse in and out, in a whispered, concerted, croaking chant, forming words in a language he did not recognize. For the first time in his adult life, he was suddenly very, very scared. If only he had not been so confident in his own abilities to dominate others. If only he had taken more time to check out the credentials of the ship and crew. If only someone had bothered to tell him that repera means leper in the Tahitian language. If you don't want me to make an offering and you're not going to make one yourselves, then why do you care if I'm here with you? One of the crew, streaked and sweaty, was very close to him now. It struck Ronken forcefully that the man smelled strongly of fish. Now that wasn't quite right. He corrected himself. The man smelled fishy. Santos was smiling at him again. A wide smile, too wide in fact, for a face that Ronken could now see was not entirely human. As you know, it's a long way from here to Mangaliva, and a long way back. And we all of us get so very, very tired of a whole trip eating nothing but seafood, Mr. Ronken. So that was the Dark Blue. I don't think that's a ship I want to go on. All right, then. So, we have another story because we're not at the top of the hour yet. Isn't that amazing? We are at the bottom of the sea, though, here in Kitely. So our next story is called Clownfish by Matthew Baugh. There was a woman standing on the water, or so it seemed. As the Lady Anne drew near, it became clear that she was actually perched in the crow's nest of a sunken vessel. She didn't try to signal. She just watched with a strange intensity as the ship approached. That worried Lady Anne's crew. They were as tough lot of sea dogs as could be found, but pirates are superstitious. The strange sight had planted thoughts of witchery in more than one mind. As they drew nearer, it became clear that the woman was young and pretty. Her thick hair hung wild about her shoulders, and her skin was as sun-darkened to a rich olive. She wore the tatters of what once had been a fine dress. "Drop anchor!" Captain Redfern bellowed. "Take soundings. If her mizzen top's showing, it may be she tore her belly open on the shoal. We'll not be doing the same." The girl watched as the ship came near to rest. She seemed only mildly curious as she pulled her ragged skirt to her thighs to dangle her feet in the water. "Blimey," a seaman named Quinlan said. "She's as shameless as a red savage, isn't she, Hawk?" The youth called Hawk didn't reply. The girl's attitude gave him an uncomfortable feeling. She didn't seem excited at the prospect of rescue, neither was she frightened at the prospect of what a ship full of men might do to her. He wondered if the time she had spent on her particular perch might have driven her mad. At 16, Hawk was one of the youngest crew on the Lady Anne. He had shown enough courage and the physical prowess to earn the respect of most of the crew. Despite that, they had never let him forget his origins. His people were the Lenape, sometimes called the Delaware. His name among them was the Mexalaniat Pehimilac. The Moravian missionaries had translated this as Jeremiah the Flying Hawk when they baptized him, and among the pirate brethren he was simply Hawk, which suited them and suited him. "Harry Dawkins," Redfern cried, "ready a longboat. We'll bring that girl aboard and get a good look at yon wreck while we're at it. I've a mind to gaze inside her hold." "I bet you do." "Aye, Captain," the big man answered, "though 'tis not the ship's hold that I long to prise open." That brought a rough laugh from the men. Black Harry Dawkins was second only to the captain. The crew admired his courage as much as they dreaded his temper. He was utterly fearless, though he lacked the good sense to be a proper ship's mate. Still, in the crude democracy of the buccaneers, such niceties as clear judgment often mattered little. At the ocean floor, something stirred. He had been sleeping for several weeks. As it grew older, and its periods of slumber would lengthen to millennia. For now this thing was young, at least by the standards of the race that had spawned it. Its hunger for nourishment outweighed its need for rest. He could sense the prey approaching. The small creatures were not yet close enough to grasp. Very soon there would be time to feed. The boat crew consisted of Redfern, Dawkins, Hawk, and 3 seamen named Rafferty, Quinn, and Morgan. They pulled through the water a little awkwardly, hampered by their attempts to catch a glimpse of female flesh over their shoulders. As they drew close, the girl slipped the tattered dress over her head. Her golden form slid into the water and disappeared from sight. "After her! Blast your eyes!" cried Black Harry. He made no move to pursue the girl himself. Though recklessly brave, Harry Dawkins was no swimmer. Belay that! Belay that!" the captain shouted. His command came too late to stop Hawkins. The youth had cleared the oars with a great leap. The water was well lit by the afternoon sun. Hawkins caught a clear view of the girl as she hung motionless for an instant. Her hair floated out in an unearthly halo. He thought he had never seen anything so lovely. She turned and flashed away before him. Hawk gave chase with all he had. Hawk was a powerful swimmer, and he could hold his breath longer than anyone on the Lady Anne. The girl looked back, her eyes wide yet unafraid. She turned down toward the keel of the wreck below. She had nearly reached it when Hawk's iron fingers caught her ankle. She kicked hard. Hawk held on with both hands and dragged her toward the surface. His lungs were nearly bursting when his head broke water. The girl hardly seemed winded. She braced her other foot against his chest to push free. Her kick brought her into the shadow of the longboat, and Black Harry's big hand caught hold of her wild tresses. The girl gave an inarticulate cry and struggled. Harry laughed at her as he hauled her in. Paused for just a moment, says, "Sorry, so sorry." "Oh, she's a fine prize, isn't she?" Harry grinned as he helped Hawk aboard. "I owe your reward, Redskin." The light was starting to fade as they continued to the crow's nest. Redfern swore softly when they looked inside the small perch. The bottom was strewn with strings of pearls, bright jewels and golden coins from a dozen different nations. There's also a black book with gilt-edged pages. Some nest our little birds got here, ain't it? Black Harry murmured. They loaded the cash and headed back. Harry Dawkins spoke the thoughts that were on all their minds. If this wench has been pulling up them pretty baubles for herself, then that hulk must be packed with treasures, huh? This may be as rich as the old days when the Spanish ships carried the gold of the heathens back from the Americas. I've never heard of such a treasure ship in our time, Redford countered, especially not when crossing from Europe. Wonder what vessel she be. She's the Annunciata, Captain, Hawk said. Annunciata? How you know that? 'Tis painted on her prow, the youth answered. I saw it when I was swimming after the girl. Where'd a heathen like you learn his letters? Black Harry asked. I sailed with Captain Clegg for 2 years, Hawk replied. He taught me. Clegg? Why'd that devil teach you anything? He told me that he could not go home without having taught at least one of his people how to read scripture. Harry threw back his head and laughed. A moment later, the others joined him. That Clegg was a right madman. God rest him. Teaching one of your people anything. Hawk was silent. Captain Clegg had been one of the few Englishmen he had ever respected. Elias Redfern was another. Most of the crew were Americans, which was a different matter for him. He had counted many of that people as friends. With war between England and her upstart colonies imminent, they seemed his natural allies. It had been the British who fought so savagely against his people during Pontiac's rebellion. With the help of some smallpox-infected blankets, they had wiped out his band. Hawk had been the only child then. He had sworn revenge on the English. He had joined the pirate brotherhood to prey on them, in fact. Of course, being a pirate led him to plunder the ships of many nations, and this girl's vessel had a Spanish name, Annunciata. He wondered again how it had come to its fate. Yes, the prey was very close now. The thing's tentacles twitched with anticipation. It knew the surface creatures well, for its dreams had often touched their simple minds. They were not at home in this ocean. They huddled in great numbers in their floating wooden vessels. Once the vessel was breached, they would be unable to fight or flee. The surface creatures were stationary for the moment. Only for a little longer they would come close. The thing beneath the waves waited. Like all of its ancient kind, it knew the value of patience. Every eye was on the girl as they brought her on board. Redfern had made one of the rowers give up his shirt to clothe her. The men's eyes strained to pierce the fabric, while Hawk was well aware of her body. It was her eyes that held his attention. They were the bright color of summer green trees. He would have found them pretty if he had seen even a glimmer of the humanity in them. Black Harry Dawkins was up the ladder a moment after the girl. He brandished a long dagger. Back, you dogs! This one's all mine! Are you giving orders on my ship, Black Harry? Redfern asked in a low voice. No, Captain. It's just... but I do lay claim to her at the forfeit of half my share of the treasure. Yes, 'tis my right by our articles it is. I lay claim. He caught the girl's hair and pulled her into a rough kiss. As he did, Hawk felt a terrible void in his stomach. It was as if the ship had sailed over the world's edge and hung there, poised to fall. He thrust the bigger man away from the girl with both hands. Hell's bells! Black Harry snarled. Are ye making challenge against me, you red whelp? A sheen of sweat broke out on Hawk's body. Like Black Henry was as good in a fight as any 2 men on the ship. To challenge him was to die. Still, the nameless dread he felt outweighed even his fear of death. Speak up, you dog! Do you want her bad enough to die for her? I don't want her at all, Hawk said. He tried to keep his voice calm. I just can't allow no one to come to her. Ha 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 ha! Black Harry grinned. I never would have thought to find such chivalry to painted savage as you. You've signed on the wrong crew if you want to see such as her handled gently. Harry brandished his knife. Belay that, Redfern cried, stepping between the 2 men. There's more here than parceling out one little wench, eh? We must needs learn if she be worth any sort of ransom, That was the remains of a lady's dress she was wearing, after all it were. A nut brown wench like this? Harry jeered. This wench is just some servant girl, I wager. No doubt she plundered the dress from the wreck, the same as she did them baubles. Maybe, the captain said. But I think we'll be finding out, afore I throw it to you wolves. In any case, I wanted to tell us where the rest of the treasure be. Black Harry nodded sullenly. He was a bully of the ship, but even he respected Redfern's judgment. Nah. Fine by me, then, he nodded sullenly. Until we decide. I want no man to be touching her. Yes. Bring the lass to my cabin, Redfern commanded. She'll be safe enough there, you have my word. He turned to Hawk. Since ye be so keen on protecting her, you're with me. Now it was past midnight when the girl finally said something. Hawk had been speaking gently to her as he might to a wild animal. They'd given her food only to have it ignored. That bothered him. She was more slender than was fashionable, but looked healthy enough. What had she been eating on her mast-top island? Redfern hadn't spoken much. He'd been watching from his hammock, taking an occasional pull of rum. He had finally drifted off to sleep. What is your name? Your name? What is your name? Hawk asked for the 100th time. Columbina, the girl said. Her voice surprised him. It was soft and pleasant where it should have been parched. She met his gaze. There was still a vacancy in those eyes. It was a look of someone whose soul had gone wandering. My name is Hawk, he said. She laughed. It had a distant sound to it. Hawk and dove, hawk and dove, hawk and dove, she chanted in a sing-song rhythm. Where are you from? Columbina is a clown. The words troubled him. They sounded like a folly, but he thought that she was trying to convey something with them. How long ago did your ship go down? She dances on the stage. Arlecchino dances with her. In and out, between the sparkles all around. She dances. Sparkles, he seized on the word. Are you trying to tell me about the treasure, Columbina? If you do, the captain will keep you safe. Always safe. He watches over me. The answer brought back the nameless dread Hawk had felt before. Columbina. Who is he? Hawk and dove, hawk and dove. Unexpectedly, she flung her arms around his neck. Her soft lips pressed his cheek. Before he could react, she backed away. She curled up on the deck, pulling arms and legs in tightly. She touched her back and felt it move with the easy rhythm of her breathing. And she was already asleep. Not much value in them words, eh, lad? Captain Redfern was sitting up, watching him with amusement. Captain? I thought I'd better let you do the talking. You have prettier face at Lord Elias Redfern. She'd be madder than Clegg, you know. Did you hear everything then, Captain? Aye, lad. I heard it all. I know a meaning of a little of what she said. Columbina be a Dago name, and it means dove. I reckon she was impressed by the contrast in her name and yours. What about the other name, Captain? Arlecchino. That I don't know, although it has a Dago sound to it, too. Redfern stroked his beard thoughtfully. Just the ravens of an added girl. Boy, I reckon mayhap she'll tell us something sane in the morning. What about the book, Captain? Hey, you mean that Bible she had? Hey, I hadn't thought to look. The book was no Bible, that was certain. It was written in a language neither man could read. The title was outlandish sounding. Kitaret Akadinzen. I reckon it to be Latin, Redfern decided. I think they think me that aqua is the word for water. Hawk flipped through the pages looking for something he could recognize. Though the book had been damaged, the sections were still legible. He made a noise of surprise as he came to a picture of a creature rising from the depths. It looked like some unnatural melding of cuttlefish, bat, and man. What is it? The Kraken, I wager, Redfern answered. It'd be a sea monster that pulls down ships to the graves, or so they say in the North Countries. Is it real, Captain? Well, I've not met a man who has seen one with his own eyes. 'Tis a story I've heard all the world round, though. Even the heathen natives of the South Seas speak of him. They call him Cthulhu or some such name. Hawk looked at the book again. A shiver ran down his spine. Aye, it's an evil book, then. The captain sat up to watch the girl while Hawk tried to sleep. It was difficult, for he was tormented by dreams. In them, he and she were dancing on a dark stage surrounded by diamond flashes. When she reached for him, her arms seemed boneless and incredibly strong. The lights vanished as she pulled him to her. He felt a touch on his cheek like soft lips. The touch spread until his face was engulfed and he couldn't breathe. Her skin had turned rubbery. The feel of it repulsed him. He fought with all his strength, but he couldn't free himself. He woke in a sweat to see the captain drowsing in his chair. Columbina had moved in the night. The warm length of her body was stretched against Hawk's back. She looked as innocent as a kitten. He moved her chair and didn't sleep again. Ah, yes, release the kittens of war. Well? Black Harry demanded. The crew was gathered in the early morning light as Redfern and the Hawk brought the girl on deck. Well, her mind might be lost, the captain answered. It is not her mind I'm interested in, Harry said with a grin. He caught the girl's slender wrist. She has a devil in her. Hawk's voice was quiet. Something in it made the big man pause. That be foolish talk. Can you prove what you say? Hawk was at a loss. He could tell them it was a half-remembered dream. Would even this superstitious lot give any credence to that? If they did, they'd likely call him a Jonah and they'd cast him adrift with her. He knew in his bones that he was right. He just didn't know any way to express it. Speak, you dog, Black Harry demanded. What devil are you talking about? Has he a name? Arlecchino, Hawk replied. Harry frowned. He'd been a ruined gentleman before joining the Brotherhood. Hearing that name seemed to stir a memory in him. Aye, Crease. Aye, that be the Italian name for Harlequin. Some say he represents the devil himself, but he's no more than a painted character in a comedy play. He frowned thoughtfully. Where'd you hear that name? The girl. What else did she say? Naught but foolishness, Redfern answered. She did call herself Columbina. Ha 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 ho ho! Columbina, eh? Columbina be the name of the lady's maid in the same plays with the... She and the Harlequin be lovers. There's no deviltry there, just a daft girl dreaming of the theatres. Bah! The dread that had filled Hawk had never fully left. Now it returned with greater force. He was certain Black Harry's actions were pushing them toward a terrible end. By your leave, Captain, the big man said. That lass is mine. Redfern nodded assent. I challenge, said Hawk. Are you mad? Gwendolyn said. He'll make chum out of you. Belay that talk, Redfern roared. I'll let no man Jack who sails under me back away from a challenge once given. What say you, Harry Dawkins? Hey, the lad's got more sand in his craw than I thought, Dawkins answered with a grin. Yeah, I'll fight him. What weapons? The captain asked. Well, I don't want to take unfair advantage of the savage, Black Harry replied. Hatchet and dagger. Hawk nodded. He preferred a good cutlass to the traditional weapons of his own people, but it would be a bad form to complain about the choice. The crew cleared a space on the deck as the two men armed themselves. Harry Dawkins flexed his powerful arms with a grin. His massive chest was covered with a mat of black hair. He stood more than a hand's breadth taller than Hawk, looking twice as massive. Though Hawk was as strong as any crewman his own size, he couldn't hope to match Harry. Dawkins came at him suddenly with a powerful slash of his small axe. Hawk ducked away rather than trying to parry. Speed was his only advantage in this fight. He didn't plan to risk a clinch. He danced back from a series of blows without making an attack of his own. Black Harry was a canny fighter. He feinted with his hatchet to mask a dagger thrust. Hawk's reflexes saved him from a killing blow at the cost of a red wound across his chest. With a grin, Harry moved to press his advantage. Hawk stumbled away from the big man's steady assault. In a desperate move, he brought his hatchet whistling down toward Harry's head. Black Harry pulled back to avoid the stroke. He knew that Hawk's wild attack would leave him open. One quick stab would end the fight. But Black Harry's head hadn't been wounded, hadn't not been the youth's real target. As he sprawled forward, he continued his slash, burying the weapon's blade in the big pirate's foot. With a scream, Harry fell to one knee. The big man was tough. He held out the dagger to keep Hawk back while he pulled the hatchet free. The weapon didn't want to come loose, though. Harry cried out as metal grated against bone. The weapon came free with a rush of blood. Hawk used his foot to flick Dawkins' discarded axe away. The man slashed at him clumsily. He slipped past it. His dagger cut across the hairy wrist. Ignoring the pain, Harry switched the knife to his good hand. He used the rail to pull himself to a standing position. You've crippled me! You've crippled me, you heathen! He said through clenched teeth. Come and finish me if you can. Enough, Redfern bellowed. You're beaten, Harry Dawkins. Leave it at that. I'll die before I live as a cripple, Black Harry snarled. And I'd rather die this way than another. Come on, you savage! Come! Hawk didn't see any way clear of killing his crewmate. With a wild cry, he leaped. Harry had been waiting for that. His dagger darted at the youth's throat. Hawk ducked and the blade cut across his forehead. He scrambled back, blood flowing into his eyes. Black Harry lurched forward, dagger extended. Hawk managed to catch the wrist. The two struggled for a moment, Harry's superior strength forcing the blade toward the smaller man's throat. Suddenly there was the sound of a splash. The girl's gone over, someone cried. After her, Redfern bellowed. Several more splashes followed as the men hit the sea. Hawk took advantage of the distraction and stomped on his opponent's injured foot. As Harry cried out, the youth heaved with all his might. The big man was slammed to the deck. Hawk took a step back, wiping the blood from his eyes. Though Harry was weakened by his bleeding foot, his eyes were defiant as he struggled to rise. Enough, Redfern barked. We've got more important matters than the two of you. Hawk, get to a boat. Quinlan, Morgan, take Dawkins below and tend to his wounds. The water stirred above. The thing felt a familiar presence. Its bait was returning. Very soon now the prey would follow. Very soon would come the feast. Now, being so close to the top of the hour, I suppose we could stop it there, but that wouldn't be much fun, would it? We got like 2 pages left. Well, page and a half. But it's a good time to pour a drink. They found the shirt the girl had worn floating near the ship. She disappeared from sight. She dove over there, Captain, one of the men said. He pointed to a spot many yards ahead. If she came back up, I ain't seen her yet. They reached the spot, and Hawk went down with the other 3 divers. As they descended, he caught sight of the girl's pale form. They sped away with the grace of a porpoise. He chased the phantom deeper into the gloom. Abruptly, it changed directions and vanished. As Hawk glanced around, he saw something else. He had descended to the shoal, which glittered all around him. He reached out to touch a gleaming object. His hand came back with a lady's necklace. Diamonds sparkled in the faint light. Hawk kicked upward. A moment later, he broke the surface near the boat. Did you see her, lad? Did you see her? She's there, Captain. I nearly caught her, but she's fast as an eel. She must be able to breathe water like one as well, Redfern called. She's not broke the surface since we've been there. There must be a cave down there with air trapped in it. I haven't seen such, Hawk said, but I found this. He tossed the necklace into the boat. Oh, bless me, that's a sight. Be there more? There's much more, Captain. The ship must have torn her belly open like you said and poured out the treasure in her wake. You hear that, buckos? Forget the last, the captain called. This is treasure enough to buy every strumpet in Kingstown. Redfern sent word to bring up the Lady Anne. The boats stayed out as platforms for the divers. Nearly every able-bodied man worked at bringing up the glittering wealth. There seemed an unlimited supply of baubles, far more than the Annunciata should have been able to carry. As they worked, Hawk felt the familiar dread growing in him again. Can I marry him? It was mid-afternoon under a bright sky. Hawk was struggling to pry a silver candelabra from the seabed. Suddenly something long and dark slipped past him. How long he couldn't tell, for its lower end disappeared into the shadowed depths. It moved with the boneless grace of an eel. Before he could react, the thing looped around one of the swimmers. The helpless man was pulled into the darkness. Hawk's eyes widened in terror as he remembered stories of Moxakuk, the giant water serpent of his people. He saw the thing rise again. It wasn't alone. There were many of them. A dozen or more serpentine shapes reached for the men. With a start, he realized that they weren't serpents. They were tentacles, attached to some unseen beast far beneath. His heart pounded as he remembered the picture in the book. Whenever a flabby arm caught a man, it pulled him down with terrible speed. As one tentacle vanished, 2 or more rose to take its place. They seemed to be attracted to movement. Hawk realized that clinging to the ocean floor was the only thing that had saved him. That couldn't last long, though. His lungs were burning with the need to breathe. He drew his dagger and turned loose. A kick against the shoal sent him speeding upward, his legs kicking. He broke surface a dozen feet from the longboat. As he swam toward it, one of the tentacles arose above the vessel. It smashed down, splintering into the sturdy craft like kindling. Half a dozen men were cast into the sea where more arms waited for them. Hawk had turned to swim for the Lady Anne when something thick and cold looped around his body. He barely had time to take a breath before he was dragged down. Down. He stabbed at the tentacle with all his might. The dagger point slid uselessly off the rubbery flesh. The light around him dimmed. The pressure in his ears became unbearable as he was drawn deeper and deeper. Another loop coiled around his body and squeezed with appalling force. Hawk lost his grip on the dagger as air bubbled from his lips. He knew that he was going to die now. He closed his eyes and prayed that it would be quick. Then something else touched him. Slender arms wound around his waist, warm flesh pressed against his body. The pressure eased, the gripping tentacle slipped away. He felt himself begin to rise. Hawk opened his eyes and saw the girl's face close to his. Her eyes were lifted to the surface. Her hair floated up in a dark cloud. Around them, the deadly tentacles were still claiming victims. Occasionally, one would move after them, only to drift away as soon as it touched the girl. After an unbearable time, they emerged into sunlight, and he gasped in draughts of air. He opened his eyes to see the wreckage of the boats on the water. There were no men in sight now. He turned to see the Lady Anne floating at anchor. There was something vast and dark in the water beneath her. It rose, and tentacles emerged to tear the sides of the ship. It was almost unbearable to look at the monstrous form. There was a wrongness about it, as if it did not fit in this world. It seemed to twist reality by its mere presence. Hawk's mind ached with the effort to try and grasp it. Dimly he heard his own voice screaming. The meal had been a good one. A few of the small creatures had slipped away, but that was unimportant now. There would always be more, and they're easy to trap. The thing hooked its claws into the belly of the Lady Anne and ripped it open. Her cargo spilled out to join the shining wealth that littered the shoal. The damaged ship sank into the deep waters and settled on the seabed near a dozen other hulks. The thing settled amid the wooden bones of its victims. Soon it would need to feed again. For now it was sated. Now was the time to sleep. Hawk woke to the sight of a sunset. The sound of lapping waves was all that he could hear. It took him a moment to orient himself. He was sitting in the crow's nest where they had first seen Columbina. There was no sign of the girl nor of his ship. He scanned the sea and saw a long, low shape moving toward him. It was one of the ship's boats. As it drew closer, he could see Captain Redford and 8 crewmen. Somehow they had evaded the doom that had claimed the Lady Anne. "'Tis good to see you, lad," the captain said as they helped Hawk on board. "I'd not thought any others could have survived." "Columbina saved me," he answered. "I don't know why." "Columbina. What was she?" "Well, maybe she was just a girl on a ship once. I think the thing keeps her alive to lure men in." Redfern shook his head wearily. "It were the same monster as in that cursed book, the Kraken come to life. I wonder if the lass called it forth somehow." "I don't know." "Did you see what became of her?" Hawk pretended not to hear the question. "Best we be away from this place, Captain." He stared back as they rode. He knew where the girl must be. If he could look into the depths, he would see her. Columbina was dancing on her dark stage, surrounded by diamond glitters as she wove gracefully in and out of the arms of her Arlecchino. That's clownfish. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you didn't get too wet. And we're a few minutes after the hour. Not as bad as I thought we might be. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with me. And now, stick around for Midnight Dreary at 9 o'clock right here. Technically, in Kitely, we'll be moving a little bit, but we'll get you there. Cthulhu meets Edgar Allan Poe in space. It's a 30-minute late night thriller, a quick one. In Kitely this weekend, there's a boatload of things to do: dances, free training, church services at Faith Chapel, and so much more. Check out the Kitely event calendar in local chat. At the Seanchai Library in Second Life, we have upcoming Monday, Gyro Muggins brings us One Step from Earth by Harry Harrison. Tuesday, More Tales with James Harriet. And next Thursday, Shadow and Bone presented by The Caledonia, followed by Seanchai Late Night. Oh, and don't forget Murphy's Inc. Check out Murphy's Inc. Facebook page for all the latest. Link in local chat.